Hi everybody, welcome to Pause. This is our Put the Kettle On series and this is number 4. Delighted to welcome Nita Sweeney, who's the latest person on our podcast. And yeah, over to you, Nita, if you want to introduce yourself.
Well, my name's Nita Sweeney, and I live in Central Ohio, United States, and I am the award-winning author of the running and mental health memoir, Depression Hates a Moving Target, How Running with My Dog Brought Me Back from the Brink, which I happen to have right here. And I'm also co-author of a writing journal called You Should Be Writing. And I live, like I said, I live in Central Ohio. I was a lawyer for many years. I began writing, many years ago. I've published a writing newsletter for Central Ohio writers now. I guess it's been 18 years. So that's been kind of my background. But in 2010, I had kind of an epiphany. So I'd had a couple of really bad years. I've had chronic depression most of my life, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I believe that was in 2005 or 2006, which made more sense because I would have these long periods of depression and then I wouldn't, and it would be very strange. And they realized that that was when I was hypomanic, was when I looked kind of normal, but then I would sink back down. And then in 2007, we had just a crazy year. My niece had been diagnosed with cancer a couple years before, and she died. And then one of my husband's good friends died. My husband's father died. My niece's father died. My niece's cat died. My mother's boyfriend died. My mother's best friend died. And then my mother died, all in the span of 11 months. So I was already depressed. And like I said, I've been a writer a long time. I had been trying to sell a book about the last year my dad was alive. He and I had, my parents had actually lived with us after he was diagnosed with cancer, and that wasn't going well. And, the grief, that was the biggest thing. So I wasn't totally sure what to do with myself. And I was sitting on the sofa with my laptop, and a friend posted about taking up running. And she said something insane like, call me crazy, but this running is getting to be fun. And I really thought she'd lost her mind. I really did, because neither one of us were athletic in high school. And we were both, I'll just say I was about the same size as she was, and I was much larger than I am now. And it just seemed odd. So I just sort of watched for a while, because there was also a part of me that knew something needed to change. I had been meditating for many years, and that's one of the tools in my toolkit. At the time, I believe I was on 6 antidepressants or 6 different medications. I think one of them was a mood stabilizer, it was a thyroid med, different things like that. And none of them, they worked. I was no longer suicidal, which I had been, but I just didn't feel like I was living, like I was thriving at all. And so I just watched, and she kept posting, week 1 done, things like that, very excited. And when I was much younger, I had run, but it was solely to lose weight. It was all about, burn off any calories I had eaten, stay trim, things like that. And I had turned away from that, and running had seemed like torture. It was always the joke that, my sport is your sport's punishment, because they make you run laps if you miss a shot or something like that in other sports. And I really just, I don't know, I just didn't really think too much about it. But she kept posting. And then finally in March, in fact, it was just about now, 11 years ago. So my run-iversary is March the 20th. I just got brave, and I thought, okay. So I looked up the plan that she had been following. It was an interval training plan, and it said 60 seconds of jogging. Now, it said a bunch of other things too, but that's what I saw. And I thought, okay, I can probably jog for 60 seconds. I can do that. But I was very paranoid, and I live in a kind of a suburban neighborhood Now, it was a weekday, and I'm not sure anybody was home anyway because they were all at work back when you used to go to work. Remember those days? But I was completely convinced that they were all watching because I was mentally ill. And so I leashed up the dog kind of as a decoy, and I pulled one of those those little plastic kitchen timers out, and I set it for 60 seconds, and I took the dog down the street, walked down to this kind of hidden ravine area near where we live, where the lots are really long and there's lots of trees. So no one could see me. And then I stood there until the dog, finally got up and peed on a bush or something because he was so bored. And throughout the book, I talk about him kind of as a coach, because he would give me these looks like, okay, Mom, what are we doing? We're just going to stand here? Are we going for a walk? What? And so I finally got the courage to hit the timer and jog for 60 seconds. And it seems like such a tiny little thing, but it was a way to take a step forward into some sort of change. And so I did the rest of that day's, I forget what they called them, workout or something like that. It was, like 60 seconds of jogging and then a couple of minutes of walking and then 60 seconds of jogging. But then I got to the top of that ravine where the road went back up into the neighborhood. And then I had another decision to make. And that particular day, I could not face running in public. And so I turned around and went back down in the ravine. I just went back and forth in the ravine for a while. And it took me a long time to get to the place where I could run in public. And I always blame that on my sister, my niece's mom. The niece, her name was Jamie, and she was my sister's only child. And I made the mistake after a while of telling her when I took up running, because I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my husband for, I think it was at least a month that I had taken up this interval plan, because he was at work all day and I was at home. And I finally told him, and he had seen me go through, the days of the mini trampoline and the aerobics classes and the weight bench that turned into a clothes rack. I mean, he'd been through it with me all these years. We've been married 27 years, I think now. And so he just was like, okay, that's great. Fine, dear. Fine. And, but my sister, she emailed me a while later and said, there's this 5K to raise money for research for the cancer that killed Jamie. Will you go with me? And she was going to walk it. And my first response, because I am a bit self-centered, mostly self-protective is what it is, was, oh, no. I'm a private runner. I don't, I'll run in my neighborhood, but I am not doing this in public. But it didn't take too long before I kind of got over myself, I guess you'll say, and went to that 5K. And the amazing thing, that just changed my whole perspective about what running is and all the reasons to do it. There were so many people of all shapes and sizes. And there was the spandex crowd and the, pink cotton sweatpants crowd and everything in between. Families, people of, I'm an older runner, very young people, these high school kids, retired folks. Everything. This wasn't even a big race. And so it completely opened my mind as to what running might be. And that was the beginning. And since then, I have run 3 full marathons, 28 half marathons in 18 states, and more than 100 shorter races. So did I mention I was bipolar? I tend to do things, that was supposed to be a joke, but I tend to do things very compulsively. Like I get into something and man, I am all in. And that's not everybody who's bipolar is like that. But when I get hypomanic, that's what happens is I'm in. Okay, so that's kind of the running story. But the more important story, which I didn't completely figure out until I was writing the book, was the mental health piece. Because there's something about, I printed out the little training plan that my friend had been following. And when I would do one of the workouts, I would check off that day. Well, that's a dopamine hit. you get a dopamine hit when you do that. And of course, the physical effects from exercise. People talk about endorphins. It's actually endocannabinoids. It's actually the stuff in medical marijuana, those neurotransmitters that give you the runner's high. That's why they call it runner's high. So all of that was going on, plus the sense of community. These people, random strangers, you see people running down the street, we wave at each other. We don't know them, but we wave. So there's this sense of camaraderie, community. And I wasn't getting any of those things. So over time, I was able to reduce my medications. I still take one antidepressant, and I take the thyroid medicine. And my mood changed. My stamina changed. Like I had mentioned before, I've been writing a long time, but I wasn't able to get a book published because I couldn't stay in there. There's a long process of editing, revision, pitching, and I couldn't do that. And it took me a while to figure out that was the story. I mean, that's not the only part of the story, but that was a big part of the story, was that I was so much better. So yeah, the story, the book is a running memoir, but it's also a book about mental health. And like I said, I thought I was running a book about, middle-aged woman takes up running, because I was 49 when I started running. And later I realized it was about a woman trying to save her life, because I had gotten, especially after all those people died, I mean, I just wasn't totally sure I wanted to be around anymore. I just didn't feel I couldn't get anything published. I just didn't feel I was worthwhile. And that's situational. But when you have both the propensity for a mental health condition and situations, it's just a recipe for disaster. I'm very fortunate. I have a lovely husband who has stayed by me all these years. I talk about in the book that a week after our first wedding anniversary, I was in a psychiatric unit. I was suicidal and had to be hospitalized to save my life. And a lot of guys would have, looked around and gone, not what I signed up for, and hit the door. But he's been here with me all these years. So, and then the book has a dog, as I mentioned. So throughout the book, the dog is kind of like my coach. He would give me these little head tilts, and oh my gosh, don't hit the alarm, either the little timer that I was using, or now I use a Garmin watch. Oh my gosh, don't accidentally hit that, because the dog is like, go, 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 and which is great, but it's also kind of funny because it spurs me on. So yeah, that's sort of the big summary. That's kind of a long, drawn out summary, but yeah. So it's funny because I have always been a meditator. I've written for all these years, but then I took up running, and that's what I kind of became. Not that I'm famous, but that's what people know me as now. So it's Nita the runner, the woman who wrote the book about running. But it just feels like another tool in my mental health toolkit. And yeah, so there you go. If you have any other questions.
Yeah. No, that's honestly what you're doing, Nita, is very brave, and what an amazing achievement. For the amount of marathons and half marathons that you've participated in is obviously a credit to yourself, and you must be so proud, obviously, to overcome what obviously your past was. And in terms of that 11 months, were you in work currently? Were you working for that law firm then, or were you just indoors, just writing your book?
The 11 months, I kind of got lost there.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of the 11 months of all the traumatic events that happened with a lot of people passing away, etc.
Yeah. So during that time, no, I had to quit the practice of law many years ago. It was a very stressful job. I had been a partner in a small law firm, and at the time, I didn't have the mental health skills to say I needed help. I had to be almost forced to take help. And then once that happened, it was almost like like I was a machine and all the pieces were working along, and then they kind of started to no longer work. They kind of unhinged, and then a spring popped out and it all fell apart, and it's never completely come back together. So I have not been able to practice law since, and I haven't really been able to hold a regular day job since. So I have been writing. During that 11 months, I was in graduate school, and thank goodness it was a low residency program, so I didn't have to show up every day. We went twice a year to the location, the campus, for an extended period of time, and met with the advisors, and they came up with a plan. And then you had deadlines. I think it was every 3 weeks we had to turn in 40 pages. So it was a regular deadline. But within that, I could have a day where I couldn't get out of bed and no one would know, except me and my husband, And so I was able to, and it was actually toward the end of the program. So I had already completed a lot of the harder work in it. But yeah, there were days when I just couldn't do hardly anything. It was really rough. Now, what happens though is when someone dies, a lot of times there's a lot of things to do afterwards. And so the grief doesn't always hit. There's shock, but the kind of long, depressing grief didn't really hit until really a year and a half later, especially after my mom died at the end of that year, at the end of the 11 months. The next few months, my husband and I was the executor of her estate. And so we spent time, disposing of all her assets, getting everything distributed, doing all that. And frankly, my husband kind of took over a lot of that because he's an accountant, and even though I'm a lawyer, I didn't practice that kind of law. And but it was really almost a year and a half later, so into 2009, when it really started to take hold. And that's why when I saw my friend's social media post, I'd been in that kind of haze of grief for a while, and I didn't pick up that digital timer right away. I had to see a number of her posts over time. And then the other thing that happened was spring. The crocuses and the snowdrops started to pop, up out of the snow, and like life returning. But yeah, during that 11 months, I don't know. It just sort of went. It was almost like we couldn't believe it was happening, because she had died, and that was such a big one. And I helped with the estate on that. And it was just, and I felt like I had to be there for my sister. And so that kind of gave me a purpose for a while. But then, when Ed's friend died, it was like, oh my gosh, 2 in 1 year. And then his father, it was just like, boom, boom, boom. We would just start to not, kind of write our sails from one, and then another one happened. And and then the end of the year is just a blur. I just don't even remember, because it was just like boom, 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 boom. Someone would call me every time the phone rang. It was just horrible. And then my mom was in the hospital for 25 days. So I spent a lot of that time at the hospital with her, thinking she was going to live, that she had a couple surgeries, and so it was just stunning. So yeah, during that it wasn't during the 11 months, it was after. And I think that's a thing. If you haven't had a huge loss like that, it's easy to think that the people need you right away and then they'll be okay afterwards. No, they need you 6 months later. They need you to check on them. They need you to send a card. They need you to bring them lunch. They need, that's the kind of stuff. Because it's after everything has settled down and the person is gone. And so that's when it really got me.
Yeah, and Nita, in terms of, tell us more about, once you'd had the idea for this book that you wanted to write, what was the process? Did you have to go and approach, a lot of publishers to try and get this book off the ground? Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, that's kind of a funny story. So I have actually written full-length manuscripts of 9 different books, and I had tried to sell a previous one about when my father died a number of years ago. It coincided with when I left the practice of law and, was in the psychiatric hospital, and that all kind of happened together. And so I'd written about that and had gone through the process of drafting query letters to agents. So that's kind of where you start, is you write. With nonfiction books, sometimes you write a proposal and you only write a few chapters, but most of what I write is more memoir, so it's a little bit more about the writing itself. The story is a big part of it, but it has to be really well written. So it's a little more like fiction in terms of how you sell it, whereas a more self-help-ish or wellness inspirational book, you might write a proposal and then before you even write the book. So I had written the manuscript of that book and had shopped it to a couple of agents, a couple of editors, and gotten some rejections, not a lot, maybe 8 or 10, but I was still pretty depressed and I didn't have the stamina to stay in there any longer. And I just sort of took that as, oh, that's a sign that I should just go on to the next book. And so I would just write another book. And they're all over the place. There are other memoirs. I have a crazy novel, a couple of kind of funny novels and stuff and I'm not naturally a fiction writer, so I don't know what'll happen with them. But yeah, so with this book, once I got to the place that I felt like I had a book, which is when I realized that the story was about more than running, because middle-aged woman runs marathon is interesting to some people, but it's not as powerful as a story where that middle-aged woman is contemplating suicide, takes up running, and wants to live, which is what it feels like that story is to me. So once I felt like I had the concept of the book, I talked to a good friend who's an amazing editor. She happens to be originally from London, living in the United States now. And I said to her, I think I'll just self-publish this one. I just don't feel like going through that whole thing. And she called me out on it. And she said, you really just have to give it a shot, because you know that you want to try to get it traditionally published with a publisher. And she was right. And so we came up with a 3-part plan. Part A was I would try to get an agent. I would, create a query letter and a synopsis and all the things that kind of market things. And then try that for a while. And then if that didn't work, I would try to get a publisher that didn't require an agent. And then if that didn't work, I would self-publish. And I would say I was at B99 by the time I was picked up. I pitched 108 agents, 132 publishers, and I entered the book into 30 contests to get one manuscript. So it's a lot of work. And, it's possible that I didn't have to submit to all those places because some of them might not have been a good fit. But that's what I did. That's what I felt like doing. I mentioned that I tend to be a little bit driven, obsessive. But I have to tell you, my favorite rejection was from Oxford University Press, which was a very high standard. But I figured, hey, I'm gonna go for it here, and they did have memoirs on their list of things that they did accept. So I shot an email to Oxford University Press, and I am from Central Ohio, and I happen to be a graduate of The Ohio State University. I'm a 3rd-generation graduate of The Ohio State University here in Columbus, Ohio. So we are the Buckeyes, right? So I shoot this email off to Oxford University Press, and a gentleman who, I wish I could remember his name. I could look it up if you need me to, but he wrote back within 5 minutes, which is like unheard of. Usually, sometimes you don't even hear at all. I'm still getting rejections for a book that's been out a year and a half, because you just don't hear from people. So he wrote back, from one marathoning Buckeye to another, I wish you well. And he said that he couldn't publish the book, that it just wasn't right for their list right now. But for me to have, sent a manuscript to, basically you're sending it to a name. I mean, you can research them, but there wasn't anything in his profile about him, any of that. And maybe I should have looked that up to figure out that he'd gone to Ohio State. I thought he was a British guy, turns out he's from Ohio. and he's a runner. I mean, that was just so random. So that was like my best rejection. So every once in a while you'd get a rejection like that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep going. So, you put that kind of stuff in a file folder for isn't that unusual, and off we go. Yeah, it's work. It's work. It's a job.
So just obviously on the book front, where can people get this book? Because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be viewing this and wondering, look, where can I actually get this book from? There might be some people in the same current situation, or have previously done marathons or got into running due to mental health. Where can they get it from?
Well, my website is nitasweeney.com. So it's just my name, NITASWEENEY.com. And there are links to all the books there. It's available wherever fine books are sold, so you can buy it on Amazon if that's your thing. I would much prefer that you buy it from an independent bookstore, and I'm pretty sure that any independent bookstore that uses any of the major distributors could order it. And there's a local bookstore here in Central Ohio, the Book Loft of German Village, that has signed copies, which some people like that. But pretty much anywhere. And I know that, Amazon has different country websites. So if you have any trouble finding it on Amazon UK, just have somebody email me, because I have all the links to how they can get it. But the easiest way is just to go to my website and then click through on the book link there, because I have I think it's called Book Linker, that lists all the places you can buy it. My editor always says, tell them wherever fine books are sold. So, but thank you. That's my favorite question. My favorite sport used to be running. Now it's signing books.
That's brilliant. And Nita, finally from me, if you talk about obviously this process, the journey you've been on, in terms of for aspiring authors out there who maybe watch this and think that they would like to, give it a go at writing their own book, what advice would you give to them?
Just stay in there. Don't give up. Don't quit your day job. Don't quit your day job. But remember that it can be a really long process. The people that you see, you've probably seen that meme about the iceberg, where what you see is at the very top and there's all that stuff underneath. That's what it's been like for me. And I think that's what it's like for most people, is that there's a ton of work underneath. Now, I'm sounds like there's a truck backing up in my neighborhood. Welcome to work from home. Sorry about that. But I'm a very intuitive person. I'm an intuitive writer. And so a lot of the, how to plot your novel, how to structure a book, how to do all that kind of stuff didn't work as well for me. So my path to writing is a little more circuitous, but I did eventually get an MFA in creative writing. That was helpful. The most helpful thing, though, was I studied with a woman named Natalie Goldberg, who wrote a book called Writing Down the Bones. And it's about how to connect with your own mind, your own body, and how to write from yourself so that your material is authentic. And I think that's part of what happened with this book, is that I finally found something where the subject was just so me, and so I was so passionate about it, and it helped others. And then the timing too, that, the world was ready to hear more about mental health, because, and now with the lockdowns, oh my gosh, everybody, everybody's got a therapist on speed dial, or if they don't, they probably should, because it's just been so rough for a lot of people. So, but just stay in there. I think on my Goodreads profile, it says, do not give up. That's the thing, if you really want to. But it's a job like anything else. So it is a lot of work. But if you're not writing it, then it's not going to happen. So, yeah.
No, honestly, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on. And I hope a lot of people see this and obviously take inspiration from it. But again, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's just a pleasure to be here. It's been great talking to you. Thanks for letting me just rattle on. I will tell my story to anyone who will listen. I also have a newsletter if people are interested in, updates on what's coming next, because I'm hoping that there'll be a book of daily meditations coming out soon. So I'm working on that, and, all kinds of projects, but all mental health, wellness, well-being, self-care. That's accidentally, that's kind of what I found is really my sweet spot. So I just hope everybody takes good care. Remember that we're living in a kind of a sea of trauma, so don't add any layers of shame.
Yeah, thanks as well for coming on from my point of view as well, Nita. It's been great to meet you and hear your story, and it's really inspirational stuff. So yeah, thanks a lot from me as well.
Yeah, well, keep up your good work. This is wonderful what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for being out there in the world and doing this. Very important. So thanks.
Thank you.